Hey everyone, we are here in downtown Austin, Texas for the Tribune Festival, and I'm talking with Dr. Peter Hotez. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to communicate with myself. And I know you're here promoting the release of your latest book. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, and it looks at how the anti-vaccine movement kind of shifted over the last decade and why it's become a lethal societal force. So I got involved in this because I have a daughter with autism and intellectual disabilities, and I wrote a previous book called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, and that kind of made me public enemy number 1 or 2 at the anti-vaccine groups, but I learned a lot about how they operate, and now it's become more of a politically engaged enterprise and linked to people in Congress, federal judges, even members of the Senate and the House, Freedom Caucus, and Fox News, to convince Americans not to take a COVID vaccine. And unfortunately, I think 200,000 Americans have lost their lives, including 40,000 Texans, because of this.
Okay. And I've noticed that you said in the book, I've been caught up with some of your recent interviews, that it seems like, from your perspective, misinformation isn't the correct terminology you want to use at this point. You've been calling it anti-science aggression. Could you explain?
Well, when you call it misinformation or infodemic, it implies it's just some random junk on the internet, and it's not that. I think it's organized, it's well financed, politically charged and motivated, and has some big players in it, like Fox News and members of the House Freedom Caucus involved in it, and it targets both the science and the scientists. But the reason we have to care about it is so many Americans, and especially in Texas during the Delta wave, BA1 wave, needlessly perished because they refused a COVID vaccine. And this is unacceptable to have this kind of attack on science, and now it's going after the scientists as well.
So as you said, you've kind of become the focal point of this debate in many ways. Obviously the Joe Rogan thing happening this summer and a lot of attention on that. Do you feel like anyone who, like those who deal with people who have questions about vaccines or who are skeptical or just exploring that realm, should not communicate with them in terms of trying to debate them? I know you said for yourself as a scientist it doesn't feel fruitful, but do you think anti-vaxxers, as it's known, shouldn't be, like, we should just kind of cast them out, or how?
Well, remember, most of the people who are refusing vaccines, and then I'm going to have to go because this sounds a little too hot for me, are victims, right? They're victims of this kind of targeted aggression from the far right, and so the book is really dedicated to those who got targeted. This is a predatory movement. So, how you talk to people about who are refusing COVID vaccines is very different from the perpetrators, the ones who are actively engaged and for political reasons are targeting these individuals.
Have you dealt with many anti-vaxxers, like trying to, counsel or talk them through, like in your practice, or?
Sure, I talk to people all the time who are reluctant or hesitant. It's getting harder now because, it used to be about explaining to parents why measles is a killer disease and why parents need to vaccinate their kids against measles. Now it's become much tougher as people go down that rabbit hole watching Fox News every night.
All right, last question for you. I know that you have, as obviously we're saying, been under attack. Fauci, there's people very critical of him. I'm curious of your thoughts, and if you've expressed them, I apologize if I missed them, but on this Proximal Origin hearing that was held recently by mainly Republicans, and the emails and messages that have come out where, from the Republicans' viewpoint, there was some discussion about it looked like a lab leak, but then let's not talk about it because it might be, in their words, shit show if China is blamed. Do you have any thoughts on those leaked emails, or people's perception that it seems like the scientists were kind of getting their talking points together prior to?
Well, here's take a step back. We have now 6 papers published in top journals clearly showing the natural origins of COVID-19. So just like SARS emerged out of a wet market in 2002, and then we had Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, another coronavirus in 2012. COVID-19 is going by the same playbook. And as my colleague Michael Warraby at University of Arizona says, the natural spillover zoonotic origins of COVID are probably the best documented origins of a major epidemic that we've ever had. And in contrast, there is 0 published papers and 0 evidence, as far as I'm concerned, of either gain-of-function research or a lab leak leading to COVID-19. If there's any out there, I'd be happy to see it. So far, I haven't seen it, and that explains why there's no published papers about it. So sure, when the virus first emerged, a number of us, had to ask, is it possible this came out of a lab? But the evidence since then has overwhelmingly identified the origins of COVID-19, and that's why I think these hearings in the House are disingenuous. In fact, even on their official Twitter handle, what did they say? They said they're selling popcorn. So they're making it clear this is nothing more than political theater and Fox News soundbites, and it's disgusting.
What do you think about the scientists who've called for Nature to retract the paper? There's, I think, been about a dozen at this point. I mean, I don't know each of their credentials and everything, but those in the scientific community who seem to say, hey, there's something here to look at. I don't know if we are in full consensus, or are those just fringe scientists, or are they?
Well, I mean, the papers that I've read are solid, published in Science Magazine and elsewhere. As I said, there's not been a single paper published on lab leak or gain of function, and the reason there's no single paper is because there's no there. There's just no evidence.
Couldn't have anything to do with the funding from the U.S. and the eco-health. I mean, there are some contracts that people are aware of now that were taking place, funding gain of function research and such like. But is that in your mind?
I don't think it was true gain of function research. Number one, and number two, and if there was any, my understanding was it wasn't funded. But the point is, we have a very solid, cogent explanation for how COVID-19 began, and I worry all of this discussion about lab leak gain of function is going to tie one arm behind the backs of virologists and make it harder, because don't forget, we've had SARS, then we've had MERS, now we've had COVID-19. We're going to have a fourth major coronavirus pandemic before the end of this decade. And we've got the avian and zoonotic flus and everything else. This is a time when we should be enabling our virologists, not trying to intimidate them.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and you mentioned Science Magazine. I noticed that Science Magazine actually recently published they're calling it we have long COVID, and they're saying there's some evidence of long vax, of people who are dealing with symptoms post-vaccine for long periods of time. Do you think those stories are worth hearing, or are those people that are anti-vaxxers we should just ignore, shut down, or censor?
I don't think they're ignored. Remember, we have one of the most sophisticated post-licensure and post-authorization monitoring systems the world has ever seen. We have the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, Vaccine Safety Data Link.
VAERS is showing a number of vaccine injuries showing up on
Well, remember, VAERS is just a top-level.
It's not reviewed.
Top level. It doesn't find cause and effect. It's sort of hypothesis generating, and then use the other systems to find it. And so far, that I've not seen evidence for strong links with vaccines in any of those things. And it does work. It's identified some very rare events.
But do you think the fact that science has brought it up now, like it's okay, a sort of mainstream publication has mentioned that, hey, some people dealing with shots are dealing with after effects that are going on for months at a time? Is that something that should be given more attention? Because the reason I ask is I feel like we're kind of dismissing the legit
But
concerns.
I don't think you need Science Magazine for that. There is a mechanism that's already in place through the Centers for Disease Control and the FDA and that system, that very detailed system that's already looking into.
Is this something other than VAERS, or are you talking about VAERS?
VAERS, Vaccine Safety Data Link. There's about 4 or 5 parallel systems.
So, but also at the same time, you said they're not really it's the first layer, right? So if somebody does review and say, hey, I've been dealing with long vax for a couple months, I got the vax, but I'm still dealing with whatever they may be dealing with, will that be followed up with? Or, because I guess the concern is people like yourself are going on TV and saying, people like yourself are going on TV and saying that we shouldn't listen to people when they have those concerns.
No, I don't think I've ever said no, don't listen to people. I'm saying we've got a system in place.
But you call it anti-vax aggression, and maybe somebody who'd been injured by the vax, by your terms, would be labeled that, even though they have legit concerns.
I've never labeled that. I use that term to those who have are either using monetary gain, monetizing the internet.
So just regular people, though, that have like concerns or injuries post-shot, you would want to hear from them.
Of course, and there's a mechanism for those people too.
So they should fill it out on VAERS. And what would you recommend to somebody who's dealing with that? What Science Magazine is called long vax?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is talk to your physician.
Talk to the physician. And go from there.
Yep.
Would you encourage them to file on VAERS? Like, would that be, like, if somebody is dealing with some post-vaccine issues?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope we can get some follow-up. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you.